The Peruvian president is on her first state visit to China. What does Dina Boluarte hope to accomplish? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Peru's President Dina Boluarte began a 5-day trip to China on Tuesday. It includes stops in Shenzhen and Shanghai and a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Both nations are looking to strengthen ties and boost bilateral cooperation after more than 50 years of diplomatic relations. CGTN's Soochow has this report from Shenzhen.
Shenzhen is the first stop on Peruvian President Dina Boluarte's visit to China. Top Chinese companies like Huawei and BYD were top of Boluarte's agenda in the Chinese tech capital, as her delegation looks to boost cooperation in the fields of science and technology. Here at the headquarters of Huawei, President Boluarte held a meeting with the company's top officials. An agreement was signed for the training of professionals in new information technology. The two sides have agreed to train 20,000 talents over the next 5 years to help Peru's technological development. At Chinese EV maker BYD, Chairman Wang Chuanfu showcased the model of its automatic assembling production line, as well as its new penetration test, the safest and most stringent for the company's blade battery used in new energy vehicles. Some of the delegates praised China's high-tech development and called for more investment in Peru.
We have copper, we have lithium, we have everything, what you need to building cars, so we will be part of the supply chain and welcome China and Peru also, no?
President Boluarte also paid a visit to Nanshan Museum, which is currently exhibiting a collection of nearly 170 artifacts from 14 museums in Peru, offering a window into the fascinating world of Andean civilization. After the stop in Shenzhen, President Boluarte will fly to Shanghai, then on to the capital Beijing for a state meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Experts expect the visit to take economic, political and cultural cooperation to a more advanced level. Soochow, CGTN, Shenzhen.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Sao Paulo, Gustavo Ribeiro is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report. From Bogota, we are joined by Richard McColl. He is a foreign correspondent and host of the podcast LatinNews. And Victor Gar is a chair professor at Soochow University. Welcome to all of you. Victor, this will be the Peruvian President Dina Boluarte's first state visit to China. She is scheduled to meet with President Xi as well as Premier Li Qiang. How important is this visit for bilateral relations?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, China and Peru are celebrating the 50th year anniversary of the normalization of relations, which is an important event for any two countries, especially for China and Peru. Peru, from the Chinese perspective, is very important. It is on the Pacific coast. It is an important member of the APEC organization. And between China and Peru, there are no issues of fundamental difference, and there are all the reasons for the two countries to cooperate in fullest term possible. Now, Peru is very much interested in leveraging off on China's high-tech and manufacturing capabilities, especially focusing on the EV, which China is definitely the leading country in the world. And I think this really bodes well for the expanded cooperation, because cooperation between China and Peru going forward will not only be restricted to minerals and agricultural and other products, for example, but more and more moving into the high-tech and the more advanced manufacturing cooperations. This is the good sign, and I truly believe that the president of Peru, after her meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Premier Li Qiang, will have a better idea as to how China and Peru can really cooperate in new ways to promote the bilateral relations to new heights, especially dominated by high-tech cooperation.
Victor, the foreign ministers of Peru, Bolivia, as well as Argentina have all visited China in April. I mean, what does this tell us about China's broader engagement with Latin America, not just diplomatic engagement, but also economic engagement?
Indeed, China's engagement with Latin American countries in general and South American countries in particular are really demonstrating new strengths in the recent decade or so, partially because from what is driven by the APEC concentration, because from the Chinese perspective, countries like Peru, Chile, etc., are very much important Pacific countries, partly because there are major gigantic economies on the South American continent, including, for example, Brazil, and to a lesser extent, Argentina. Now, these countries are highly complementary to China. For example, we really have a mutual demand for each other's strengths and resources, for example. But all these countries now want to cooperate with China for several things. One is the enhanced connectivity projects of all kinds, sometimes even across the South American continent, from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific coast, for example, as well as I mentioned just now, the high-tech cooperation, especially when China brings onto the table the EV, for example, semiconductors, and the mobile telecommunication, and all kinds of high-tech projects and concepts which dazzle many countries in Latin America. Now, while the United States is very much scared about China's technological excellence, many countries in Latin America are opening their door to welcome such Chinese technological breakthroughs and advances because they really can bring bread and butter onto the table. They can help improve the living standards of all these countries and advance their modernization and high-tech revolution.
Richard, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. The Peruvian president, Boluarte, she also met with the chairman of the electronics giant, Huawei, as well as the chairman of BYD, the EV manufacturer, and she'll also meet with the chairman of the shipping company, COSCO. Looking at these meetings she's been having, what does this tell us about where her priorities lie and what she's hoping to achieve with these visits?
Well, the key these markets and this huge.
Okay, Richard, we have a problem with your audio. We'll try and fix it. Okay, I want to get back to Victor. Victor, you know, we're talking about Peru's relationship with China. I mean, China is Peru's largest trading partner, and Peru is China's largest, or second largest rather, investment destination in Latin America. And we look at bilateral trade between these two countries. It exceeded $37.6 billion in 2023. And they recently completed what was the 7th round of these negotiations they've been having on a free trade agreement. So when we look specifically at, you know, that relationship, where do you see it heading?
As I mentioned, China wants to fully cooperate with important countries like Peru in several things. One is to help them to strengthen and beef up their connectivity projects. For example, pan-Pacific highways, railways, enhanced, improved airports, seaports, for example. This is number one. Number two is that to really develop their economic strength so that they have more export to China, to be shipped by trans-Pacific shippings, for example. And this also require more and advanced and improved infrastructure and connectivity projects of all kinds. Thirdly, in terms of financial connectivity and technological connectivity, Peru is not well known for higher level of technological breakthroughs up to now, but China wants to leverage its strength in high-tech, in science, with Peru, with no reservation, so that it will help enhance the Peruvian advance towards higher level of modernization and industrialization and manufacturing. And when we are entering this AI age, there are indeed many important minerals in Peru which can be put to great use, not only for its own economic benefit, but to promote the AI development and the digital revolution that we are talking about. That means for China, the cooperation with Peru need to be upgraded from the traditional way of cooperation, which has been very successful for both China and Peru, but to the higher level of economic cooperation, including, in particular, focusing on high-tech and digital revolution and AI revolution going forward.
Okay, let's go to Sao Paulo to Gustavo. Gustavo, great to see you as well. Of course, any discussion on China's relationship with Latin America cannot exclude Brazil. It is the biggest economy in Latin America. Very close relationship between Brazil and China, not just an economic and trade one, but also a diplomatic one. Both these countries are members of BRICS as well. And if we look at the level of trade between the two countries over the past year, and we look particularly at Brazil's agribusiness, for instance, sales to China amounted to $60.24 billion. That was in 2023. That is, in fact, a record, and it amounts to a third of all agribusiness exports from Brazil to China. So how would you characterize the relationship right now?
Well, it's a vital one for Brazil. Like you said, China is the #1 importer of Brazilian commodities, not only agricultural commodities, but also iron ore and oil. This is a vital trade relationship for Brazil. And even during the Jair Bolsonaro administration, the far-right president had pretty strong and often racist remarks on China and the Chinese people. But even during his administration, there were no moves to disrupt the trade relations between these two countries, because, for instance, the agribusiness sector, which supports Jair Bolsonaro, knows that it cannot live without China. Now, Brazil, this relationship is not only based on trade, but, for instance, Brazil was the 4th largest recipient of Chinese offshore investments between 2005 and 2022. Chinese investments are very important, especially in the energy sector. Now, even if China has adopted a more cautious stance on investments over the past few years, it has in 2022 approved the largest number of new projects in Brazil at 32. So this relationship is going to continue to thrive. President Lula, who took office last year, has made a mission to increase relations with China, and this is not only because of a trade perspective, but also because of a geopolitical perspective. Lula does not want Brazil to be automatically aligned to the US or Europe, and thinks that Brazil will have more leverage on the global stage if the world becomes more multipolar, and that's why he seeks better relations with China. That being said, if I may just add one point, Brazil is one of just 3 countries in South America not to be a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, there is the perspective that maybe Brazil will join the initiative later this year when Xi Jinping visits Brazil for the G20 summit. That would be a pretty big announcement by Lula and Xi, who will have a bilateral meeting then. But there's also concerns from Brazilian construction companies that could allow Chinese companies to steal their market.
Richard, I'm glad to hear that the technical problem has been resolved and you're back with us. And I just want to pose that question to you again. You know, the visit by Dina Boluarte to China. She met, as I said, with the chairman of Huawei, which is that huge Chinese electronics conglomerate, as well as the chairman of BYD, the electronic vehicles giant. She will also meet with the chairman of Costco, which is a Chinese shipping company, one of the biggest in the world. When you look at the people she's meeting, these discussions that she's having, what does this tell you about her priorities and what she's trying to accomplish with this visit?
Well, I think that everything points towards the huge Costco port at Chancay, so just around 50 miles north of Lima. Everything points to this. It's going to be a gateway for global markets, for China, and of course for South America. President Boluarte is obviously trying to position Peru as a key player and also looking east towards Brazil. How can they move Brazilian product through Peru out through the Chancay port? The meetings with BYD, of course, there have been talks of a business plant or a construction plant down there in Arequipa, so a couple of 100 miles south of Lima or further than that. And the Hawaii investment is aimed at increasing communications within Peru itself. So her aim is totally that of bringing Peru forward on the global stage as a major trading partner.
And this visit, Richard, by the Peruvian president, it was done in somewhat of a different way than normal visits are done. In fact, it had to be approved by the Peruvian Congress for the president to travel to China. So what does that give her? Does it give her a much bigger mandate to carry Peru's message across to China?
It's a difficult one with President Boluarte at the moment. The situation in Peru is very unstable regarding their politicians, regarding their presidents. As you know, there has been quite a high turnover of presidents in recent months and years. So really, that Congress had to get involved was that people's agreements, let's say, political noose needed to be applied to permit her to go out to make big decisions of this kind and have meetings at this top level, as she is in a very precarious situation.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. We'll be back with more of our conversation on China-Latin America relations. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
The world's currencies are more connected than ever before. The mechanisms that drive the economy are universal. Money moves markets. We explain these trends and show you how the cash in your pocket can have a wide-reaching effect. Because money makes the world go round. Global business.
To know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the latest on China-Latin America relations. And Gustavo, Richard was talking a moment ago about that port that's being built in Peru right now, the Chancay port. There's lots of hype about this port. It's being talked about as being the gateway to Latin America. And I'm wondering, what kind of potential does it offer to a country like Brazil? I mean, can Brazil exploit the opportunities that this port will offer, which is, going to be also the gateway to Asia?
Well, Brazil is certainly hoping so. The country has launched a recent project to connect some of its main grain-producing areas to multiple other South American countries, including Peru, and the Peruvian access is one of the big priorities. Brazil wants a quicker access to the Pacific, and now this project will be contingent to Brazilian investment capabilities. Now, the government is cash-strapped at the moment. It deals with a lot of struggles to meet its fiscal goals. So there's a lot of uncertainties whether or not Brazil will be able to put the investments needed to connect its grain-producing areas to these other Pacific ports in Chile and in Peru as well.
Victor, the Chinese Vice Minister of Commerce, Guo Tingting, spoke at this year's 10th China-LAC Infrastructure Forum that took place in McColl just a few days ago. It's a forum that focuses on infrastructure. The LAC in that name, of course, is Latin America Caribbean. Let's listen to some of what she had to say.
Latin America is China's third biggest overseas market for infrastructure contract works. So far, Chinese companies have signed over $280 billion worth of infrastructure contract works in Latin America and completed a turnover of over $180 billion.
So, Victor, what is the driving force behind China's ongoing investments in the region?
Thank you. This is a very important question. As we mentioned, the bilateral trade between China on the one hand and many Latin American countries over the past decade or so has been significantly increased. Now, there is a bottleneck, that is to ship goods through the Panama Canal from countries like Brazil and Argentina, for example, because the Panama Canal is normally congested. So there are different ways. One is to build another Panama Canal, but it can be complicated for multiple reasons. The other thing, which is happening as we speak, is to build up railway and highway connectivities between the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast in connecting countries like Brazil and Argentina to the Pacific coastal countries like Peru and Chile. Now, once there are better connectivity projects involving the two sides of the coast, for example, then for Brazil, for example, they can ship many of their products to the Pacific coast to be shipped across the Pacific Ocean to China, and vice versa from China to the Pacific new ports in Peru and Chile, and then load them onto the ground transportation, rail or highway, to final destinations in Brazil or Argentina. Now, this is a completely new way of connectivity for Latin American countries, and this involves a very bold, audacious concept of linking the Pacific coastline and the Atlantic coastline together. Now, this is not only a very huge investment, but it will have huge, profound implications for many countries in South America, in particular, important countries like Brazil and Argentina. Now, this investment will be for the benefit of people in many countries in the South American continent, not only for decades, but maybe for the coming few centuries. And from the Chinese perspective, it is very committed to help all these South American countries to beef up new ways of connectivity so that trade can be boosted in multiple ways.
Richard, talking about cooperation on infrastructure construction between China and Latin America, I mean, that's increased. We look at the numbers here. More than 20 Latin American countries have signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. That's as of last year, 2023. I mean, do you see that this kind of relationship will be expanded, that more countries perhaps will join the BRI?
I think it's a certain degree of inevitability about more countries joining the BRI. The countries in the region have always looked to the US for their investment and for their help. And in the last decades, the US really has been silent and has not offered any alternatives or any counter offers to Chinese investment. When you get a country like Honduras turning around and saying, yes, we're no longer going to recognize Taiwan, it's because they hope for a flood of investment from China into their infrastructure, into their energy, into their society. So I think, given the situation currently between the US and the region, even though the US has more than 200 years of shared history, culture, and economic interdependence with the region, China has come in with a multifaceted plan and relationship in this area.
Gustavo, one other thing I want to look at, and that is technology cooperation between Brazil and China. Now, during his visit to China last year, it was the president of Brazil, I mean, he emphasized that he would like to see more cooperation in technology. Semiconductor technology, for one, was very high up on his agenda. And they were talking about, you know, not just selling semiconductors both ways, but also developing the industry in each other's countries. Where has that gone?
Well, Brazil, that has not gone very far yet. Brazil has now a new semiconductor policy that is more focused on local production and on incentivizing local production of semiconductors. But there is a big array of cooperation negotiations between Brazil and China regarding technology, regarding science. Let's remember that Brazil and China are to launch or predicting to launch a satellite for South America in 2028. There's also FAPESP, a very important research organization in São Paulo that has just weeks ago signed a cooperation deal with Chinese institutions for technology transfer. And Lula just said on Friday that he wants to strengthen ties with Beijing, and he wants a decades-long partnership, especially focused on more value-added products, because he thinks that Brazil should not just focus on agricultural exports to China.
Richard, just a bit of time left, but I want to talk about the prospective visit by President Xi to Peru. President Boluarte has invited the Chinese leader to Peru. What are your expectations on that?
Well, it will be a big deal. It will be a big deal in the region. It depends also in this meeting, the APEC meeting later on in the year, which other premiers in the region will attend. Of course, there's been public spats between President Boluarte and other premiers from the region, not least the Colombian President Gustavo Petro. So will he come along? We don't know yet, but there will be definite interest, and of course, the USA and Canada are not included in this Pacific alliance. So very interesting to watch.
Okay, and that is where we need to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.